Misogynistic teacher demands a girl drop out, then her father shocks the school. The morning sun streamed through the classroom windows, casting long beams of light over the rows of desks. Students whispered and shuffled papers as Mr. Thompson, their science teacher, scribbled a complex equation on the chalkboard. His posture was stiff, his movements sharp and impatient. He was known for his strict demeanor, but what set him apart wasn't his authority, it was his blatant favoritism. "All right, class," Mr. Thompson said, turning to face the room. His eyes scanned the rows of students, lingering on the boys while barely acknowledging the girls. This equation should be easy for anyone who's paying attention. Amelia sat near the middle of the room, her dark brown eyes fixed on the board. She loved science, the logic, the problem-solving, the thrill of discovery. But she hated the way Mr. Thompson treated her. Despite being one of the brightest students in the class, she was often overlooked or dismissed. "Who can solve this?" Mr. Thompson asked, gesturing to the equation. His gaze darted past Amelia, landing on a boy in the front row. "James, why don't you give it a try?" James frowned, clearly uncertain, and scribbled a few numbers on his notebook. "I think the answer is 12. "Incorrect," Mr. Thompson said, shaking his head. "Anyone else?" Amelia's hand shot up. She had solved the problem as soon as it was written, but she knew Mr. Thompson wouldn't call on her unless he had no other choice. With a sigh, he finally nodded toward her. "Fine, Amelia. What's your answer?" "The answer is 7, Amelia said confidently. "You need to isolate the variable by dividing both sides by 3. Mr. Thompson frowned, clearly annoyed. "Lucky guess," he muttered. He turned back to the board and erased the equation without acknowledging her further. Amelia's cheeks flushed, but she didn't let his comment bother her. She was used to this treatment. Still, she couldn't help but wonder why he seemed to dislike her so much. Was it because she was a girl? Or because she refused to let his comments hold her back? Later that day, during the lunch break, Amelia sat with her friend Lily at a table near the back of the cafeteria. Lily was fuming, stabbing at her salad with a fork. "I don't understand why he's like that," she said. "You're smarter than half the boys in that class, but he treats you like you don't belong there." Amelia shrugged, taking a bite of her sandwich. "It doesn't matter. I'm not going to let him stop me." "It does matter," Lily insisted. "He's supposed to be a teacher. He's supposed to encourage students, not tear them down." Amelia smiled faintly. "Thanks, Lily. But I'm fine. I'll prove him wrong." Before Lily could respond, a group of boys walked by their table, laughing and jostling each other. One of them, a tall boy named Eric, stopped and smirked at Amelia. "Hey, science genius," he said mockingly. "You gonna solve all the world's problems with your calculator?" Amelia rolled her eyes. "Maybe. Someone has to." The boys laughed, and Eric shook his head. "Good luck with that. Everyone knows girls aren't cut out for this stuff." Lily started to stand, but Amelia placed a hand on her arm, stopping her. "It's not worth it," she said quietly. "Let it go." But deep down, Amelia's resolve hardened. She wasn't going to let them, or Mr. Thompson, make her feel small. The turning point came a week later, during a class project. Each student was tasked with creating a presentation on a scientific principle of their choice. Amelia chose renewable energy, a topic she was passionate about. She spent hours researching, building a model wind turbine, and preparing her presentation. By the time the day of the presentations arrived, she felt ready. But when it was her turn to present, Mr. Thompson barely looked at her. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, and watched her with an expression that bordered on boredom. The other students, however, were captivated. Amelia explained the mechanics of the wind turbine with clarity and enthusiasm, and her model worked perfectly, generating enough energy to light a small bulb. When she finished, the room erupted into applause, except for Mr. Thompson. "Not bad," he said, his tone dismissive. "But don't get too comfortable, Amelia. Science isn't exactly a career path for girls. Maybe stick to something more practical." The words hit Amelia like a slap. She stared at him, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to process what he had just said. The other students exchanged shocked glances, and even Lily looked stunned. "But I want to be a scientist," Amelia said, her voice trembling. "Why can't I?" Mr. Thompson smirked. "Because it's not realistic. That's just the way the world works." That evening, Amelia went home feeling defeated for the first time. Her father, John, noticed immediately. He was sitting at the kitchen table, going over paperwork, when Amelia walked in and dropped her bag on the floor. "Hey, kiddo," he said, looking up. "Tough day?" Amelia nodded, sinking into a chair across from him. "Mr. Thompson doesn't think I should be a scientist?" John frowned, setting his papers aside. "What makes him think he gets to decide that?" "He said it's not realistic," Amelia replied, her voice breaking. "That I should focus on something practical." John's expression darkened, and he reached across the table to take her hand. "Amelia, listen to me. You're one of the smartest people I know, and if you want to be a scientist, nothing, absolutely nothing, can stop you. Especially not some narrow-minded teacher." Amelia looked up at him, tears brimming in her eyes. "But what if he's right? What if I'm wasting my time?" John squeezed her hand gently. "He's not right, and you're not wasting your time. You're going to show him, and everyone else, exactly what you're capable of. And I'm going to help you." Amelia sniffed, a small smile forming on her lips. "Thanks, Dad." "Anytime," John said. "Now, let's figure out how to prove him wrong." The next day, Mr. Thompson called John in for a meeting. Amelia waited outside the classroom, her heart pounding as she tried to listen through the door. Inside, Mr. Thompson was pacing, his voice calm but condescending. "Mr. Carter," he began, "I'm concerned about your daughter. She's bright, sure, but her ambitions are misplaced." John raised an eyebrow. "Misplaced? How so?" "Well," Mr. Thompson said, "science is a competitive field. It's not suitable for everyone, and I think it would be best if Amelia focused on something more realistic." John leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "And you think you get to decide what's realistic for my daughter?" Mr. Thompson hesitated. "I'm only trying to be practical." John's voice turned cold. "No, you're trying to hold her back. And I won't let you." Amelia's heart swelled as she heard her father's words. For the first time, she felt like she had someone truly in her corner. Mr. Thompson's office was unusually quiet as John leaned forward, fixing him with a steely gaze. The silence felt heavy, and Amelia, waiting outside the classroom, strained to hear the conversation. She could feel the tension through the door. "You know," John said slowly, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge, "you've got a lot of nerve telling me what my daughter can and can't do. Especially when it's clear you've underestimated her." Mr. Thompson folded his arms, his expression defensive. "It's not about underestimating her. It's about preparing her for the real world. Do you have any idea how hard it is for girls to make it in fields like science? I'm just trying to save her from disappointment." John let out a soft laugh, though there was no humor in it. "And you think the solution is to discourage her before she's even had a chance to try?" Mr. Thompson opened his mouth to respond but stopped when John continued, his voice growing firmer. "My daughter has more determination in her little finger than most people have in their entire bodies. She's curious, bright, and resilient, and she's going to be successful not because of people like you, but despite you." Amelia's heart swelled as she listened, her father's unwavering support filling her with newfound confidence. Mr. Thompson, however, didn't seem moved. "With all due respect, Mr. Carter," he said, his tone clipped, "this isn't about her determination. It's about being realistic. The world is what it is, and it's better for her to learn that now than later." John stood, towering over the seated teacher. His voice was calm, but there was a sharpness to it that made Mr. Thompson flinch. "The world changes because of people like Amelia, people who challenge outdated ways of thinking. And I'm going to make sure she has every opportunity to prove you wrong." With that, John turned and walked out, his steps purposeful. He opened the door to find Amelia standing there, her face a mixture of nervousness and pride. He gave her a reassuring smile and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Come on, kiddo," he said. "We've got work to do." That evening, the Carter household was a flurry of activity. John spread out textbooks and notes across the kitchen table, setting up a mini classroom for Amelia. He had always been quietly supportive of her ambitions, but now he was taking an active role in helping her succeed. "We're going to push past what you're learning in school," John said, flipping open a textbook on physics. "If Mr. Thompson wants to question your abilities, we'll give him something he can't ignore." Amelia's eyes sparkled with determination. "What should we start with? How about building on your renewable energy project?" John suggested. "We can take it to the next level, something bigger, more complex." Amelia nodded eagerly. She had loved working on her wind turbine model, and the idea of expanding on it excited her. Together, she and her father brainstormed ideas late into the night, sketching diagrams and planning out experiments. Over the next few weeks, Amelia threw herself into the project with relentless energy. Every day after school, she worked with her father to design and build a larger, more advanced version of her wind turbine. They collected materials, tested prototypes, and fine-tuned their designs. Word began to spread around the school about Amelia's new project. Some students were curious, while others, like Eric and his friends, mocked her efforts. But Amelia didn't let their comments get to her. She had something to prove, not just to Mr. Thompson, but to herself. Meanwhile, Mr. Thompson continued his dismissive behavior in class, though it was clear he was growing increasingly frustrated with Amelia's refusal to back down. He often singled her out with impossible questions, hoping to catch her off guard, but she always responded with poise and accuracy. One day, as Mr. Thompson was preparing to hand out an assignment, Amelia raised her hand. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice steady, "I'd like to propose something." He arched an eyebrow, clearly uninterested. "And what would that be, Miss Carter?" "A challenge," she said, standing up. The entire class turned to look at her, their curiosity piqued. "I'll create a project that demonstrates advanced scientific principles, something beyond what's in our curriculum. If I succeed, you'll admit that I belong in this class." Mr. Thompson smirked. "And if you fail?" "I won't fail," Amelia said firmly. The class buzzed with whispers, and even Mr. Thompson looked momentarily surprised by her confidence. After a pause, he nodded. "All right, Miss Carter. You have 1 month. Let's see what you can do." Amelia worked harder than ever over the next few weeks. Her father continued to mentor her, sharing his knowledge and encouraging her every step of the way. The project became a family effort, with Amelia's mother occasionally pitching in to help gather supplies or offer moral support. The final design was nothing short of impressive. Amelia and her father had constructed a functional wind turbine capable of powering small household appliances. They even added a data collection system to measure its efficiency in real time. By the time the day of the presentation arrived, Amelia felt a mixture of nerves and excitement. The project was everything she had hoped for, and she couldn't wait to show it off. The entire school gathered in the auditorium for the presentation. Students, teachers, and even some parents filled the seats, eager to see what Amelia had created. Mr. Thompson stood near the front, his arms crossed and his expression skeptical. Amelia stepped onto the stage, her wind turbine model set up behind her. She took a deep breath and began her presentation, explaining the principles behind renewable energy and detailing the design process she had followed. Her words were clear and confident, and the audience listened intently. When she powered up the turbine, the light bulb attached to it flickered on, eliciting gasps and applause from the crowd. Amelia smiled, but she wasn't finished yet. She demonstrated the data collection system, showing how the turbine could optimize its performance based on environmental conditions. As she concluded her presentation, the auditorium erupted into applause. Students cheered, parents clapped enthusiastically, and even some of the teachers looked impressed. Mr. Thompson, however, remained stone-faced. John stood up from his seat in the audience and approached the stage. The room fell silent as he joined Amelia at the podium. "I'd like to say something," John began, his voice carrying easily across the room. "First, I want to say how proud I am of my daughter. She's shown incredible determination and creativity, and I couldn't be more impressed." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the audience. "But I also want to address something that's been bothering me. There are people who think girls like Amelia don't belong in fields like science, people who believe outdated stereotypes about what women can and can't do. His eyes landed on Mr. Thompson, who shifted uncomfortably. Let me be clear, those beliefs have no place in our schools. Every student deserves the chance to pursue their dreams, regardless of their gender. And as adults, it's our responsibility to support and encourage them, not hold them back. The audience erupted into applause once more, this time louder and more enthusiastic. Mr. Thompson's face turned red, but he didn't say a word. John turned to Amelia, smiling. You've proven yourself, kiddo. And I know this is just the beginning. Amelia beamed, her heart swelling with pride. For the first time, she felt truly seen, not just as a student, but as someone with limitless potential. In the weeks that followed, Mr. Thompson faced mounting pressure from parents and administrators to step down. His behavior had sparked outrage in the community, and it was clear that his time at the school was over. Amelia, meanwhile, became a source of inspiration for her classmates. Girls who had once felt hesitant about pursuing their interests in science began to follow her example, and even the boys in her class started to treat her with newfound respect. Years later, Amelia achieved her dream of becoming a scientist, specializing in renewable energy. She often returned to her hometown to speak at schools, encouraging young girls to pursue their passions and reminding them that they were capable of anything. And through it all, she never forgot the lesson her father had taught her: strength isn't about proving others wrong, it's about believing in yourself, no matter what. Amelia's groundbreaking presentation had left an undeniable mark on the school. Her success rippled through the community, inspiring not just her peers but also teachers and parents who had previously overlooked the potential of students like her. The auditorium buzzed for weeks after her triumph, and she became a symbol of resilience and ambition. However, the aftermath wasn't as simple for Mr. Thompson. The school board called an emergency meeting to address the complaints they had received, not only from John Carter but also from several other parents who had become aware of the teacher's outdated and discriminatory behavior. The once feared educator now found himself under scrutiny, his rigid worldviews clashing with the progressive values the school was trying to uphold. At the meeting, Mr. Thompson sat stiffly in a chair as John stood before the board, speaking with calm authority. "I'm not here to demand someone's job," John began, his voice steady. "But I am here to demand accountability. My daughter, Amelia, is one of the most capable and hardworking students this school has ever seen. Yet, instead of nurturing her potential, Mr. Thompson went out of his way to discourage her. That's not education, it's sabotage." The board members nodded, murmuring among themselves. One of them, Mrs. Patel, leaned forward. "Mr. Thompson, would you like to respond?" The teacher cleared his throat, his usual bravado nowhere to be found. "I only wanted to prepare her for the realities of life. The world isn't kind to people who reach beyond their capabilities. And who are you to decide her capabilities?" John asked, his tone sharp but measured. "A teacher's job is to guide, not to limit. Amelia is thriving because she refused to listen to your limitations, but not every student is as resilient. How many others have given up because they believed your words?" The room fell silent, and for the first time, Mr. Thompson looked genuinely unsettled. Meanwhile, Amelia's classmates were undergoing their own transformations. Eric, the boy who had once mocked her ambitions, approached her after class one day. He shuffled his feet awkwardly, his face red with embarrassment. "Hey, Amelia," he said, scratching the back of his neck. I wanted to say sorry. For, all the stuff I said before." Amelia raised an eyebrow, surprised. "What changed your mind?" Eric shrugged, looking down. "I saw what you did with that turbine. It was amazing. I guess I never really thought about how hard you must have worked for it. You've got guts. More than I ever gave you credit for." Amelia smiled, her heart softening. "Thanks, Eric. That means a lot." From that day on, Eric started treating her with respect, and the rest of the boys in the class followed suit. Amelia's presence in the science lab no longer felt like an anomaly, it felt like a given. As the weeks passed, Amelia's project continued to garner attention. The local newspaper ran a story about her achievements, dubbing her the bright future of science. The article highlighted not only her work but also the support she had received from her father, portraying John as a dedicated parent who had gone above and beyond to empower his daughter. The article caught the eye of a regional science organization, which invited Amelia to present her project at their annual expo. The event was attended by professionals, academics, and aspiring young scientists from across the state. John and Amelia spent days preparing for the expo. They polished her presentation, refined the turbine's design, and practiced answering potential questions from the audience. On the day of the event, Amelia felt a mixture of nerves and excitement as they arrived at the bustling convention center. The expo was a whirlwind of activity. Booths lined the massive hall, showcasing everything from robotics to environmental solutions. Amelia's display, with its sleek wind turbine and interactive data charts, quickly drew a crowd. She spoke with confidence, explaining her work to anyone who stopped by. Halfway through the day, a man in a crisp suit approached her booth. He introduced himself as Dr. Patel, a professor of environmental engineering at a prestigious university. "This is impressive work," Dr. Patel said, examining the turbine. "How old are you?" 14, Amelia replied, smiling shyly. Dr. Patel raised his eyebrows. 14? And you built this? She did, John interjected proudly. All of it. I just helped with a few heavy lifts. Dr. Patel nodded, clearly impressed. You have a bright future ahead of you, Amelia. Have you thought about applying to programs that can nurture your talents? Amelia blinked, startled by the question. But I hadn't thought that far ahead. Well, you should, Dr. Patel said. Here, take my card. When you're ready, give me a call. I'd be happy to help you explore your options. Amelia accepted the card, her hands trembling slightly. For the first time, she began to see a clear path to her dreams. Back at school, the fallout from the board meeting came to a head. Mr. Thompson was placed on administrative leave pending an investigation, and a substitute teacher was brought in to take over his classes. The new teacher, Mrs. Jensen, was the polar opposite of Mr. Thompson, encouraging, open-minded, and eager to nurture her students' curiosity. Amelia thrived under Mrs. Jensen's guidance. She continued to excel in her studies, earning top marks and winning several academic awards. The change in atmosphere was palpable, and even the most reluctant students found themselves engaging more in class. One afternoon, as Amelia packed up her books, Mrs. Jensen called her over. Amelia, I've been meaning to tell you something, she said. I read about your wind turbine project. It's incredible work. You should be very proud. Thank you, Amelia said, her cheeks flushing with pride. I also heard about what happened with Mr. Thompson, Mrs. Jensen continued, her tone gentle. I want you to know that teachers like him are the exception, not the rule. Most of us are here to help students like you reach their full potential. Amelia nodded, her heart swelling. I've learned that now. And I'm grateful for the support. Years passed, and Amelia's journey continued to inspire those around her. She earned a scholarship to study environmental science at a prestigious university, where she delved into research on renewable energy solutions. Her work gained national attention, and she was invited to present at conferences and collaborate with leading scientists in the field. But Amelia never forgot where she came from. She often returned to her hometown, visiting schools and speaking to students about the importance of perseverance and self-belief. Her story became a beacon of hope for young girls who dreamed of breaking barriers. One day, while giving a talk at her old school, she noticed a familiar face in the audience. Eric, now a teacher himself, was sitting in the back row, listening intently. After the talk, he approached her with a wide grin. You've come a long way, Amelia, he said, shaking her hand. So have you, she replied, smiling. Teaching suits you? Eric laughed. I had a good example to learn from. You taught me more than you realize. Amelia's heart swelled. Thank you, Eric. That means a lot. As Amelia's career flourished, she remained close to her father, who continued to be her biggest supporter. One evening, as they sat together on the porch of their family home, watching the sun set over the horizon, John turned to her with a thoughtful expression. You know, he said, when you were little, I used to wonder what kind of person you'd grow up to be. But I never could have imagined this. You've exceeded every expectation I ever had. Amelia smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. I couldn't have done it without you, Dad. You believed in me when no one else did. John placed a hand on hers, his voice steady. And I always will. The two sat in comfortable silence, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink. Amelia thought about everything she had overcome, from Mr. Thompson's doubts to her own fears, and felt a deep sense of gratitude. Her journey was far from over, but she knew that with her father by her side, she could face whatever challenges lay ahead. Amelia stood in the middle of the bustling university campus, clutching her schedule and a map of the sprawling grounds. She had dreamed of this moment for years, but now that it was here, she felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. The faces around her were unfamiliar, the classrooms dauntingly large, and the weight of expectation pressed heavily on her shoulders. First day, she murmured to herself, drawing a deep breath. You've got this. Her first class was advanced physics, taught by a professor whose reputation preceded him. Dr. Hargrove was a towering figure in the field, known for his no-nonsense teaching style and rigorous expectations. Amelia found a seat near the middle of the lecture hall, her notebook and pen ready. Dr. Hargrove entered the room, his presence commanding immediate attention. He wasted no time diving into the subject matter, scrawling equations across the board at a pace that made Amelia's head spin. She scribbled furiously, determined to keep up, but by the end of the lecture, her confidence had taken a hit. As the weeks passed, the challenges mounted. The coursework was grueling, the labs demanding, and the competition fierce. For the first time, Amelia found herself questioning whether she truly belonged. Many of her classmates had attended prestigious prep schools, and their ease with the material only heightened her feelings of inadequacy. One evening, as she sat in her dorm room surrounded by textbooks and empty coffee cups, Amelia called her father. The sound of his voice brought instant comfort. "How's my favorite scientist?" John asked, his tone warm. "Tired," Amelia admitted, her voice cracking. "It's so much harder than I expected, Dad. Everyone else seems to know what they're doing, and I feel like I'm falling behind." John was silent for a moment, then said, "Amelia, do you remember when we built that first wind turbine together?" She smiled faintly, the memory filling her with warmth. "Of course I do. Do you remember how many times we had to adjust it? How many times we thought we got it right, only to realize it wasn't working?" Amelia nodded, her grip on the phone tightening. "Yeah, but we figured it out eventually." "Exactly," John said. "You figured it out because you didn't give up. You're going to feel out of your depth sometimes. That's part of the process. But I know you, Amelia. You're a problem solver. You'll find your way." His words steadied her, and by the time she hung up, she felt a renewed sense of determination. Amelia threw herself into her studies with even greater focus. She sought help from professors during office hours, formed study groups with her peers, and spent late nights in the library, poring over textbooks. Slowly but surely, she began to find her footing. Her turning point came during a particularly challenging lab project. The task was to design and build a device that could convert kinetic energy into usable electricity. Many of her classmates struggled with the concept, but Amelia's experience with renewable energy gave her an edge. She stayed late in the lab, tinkering with her design, testing and retesting until she was satisfied. When the day came to present her work, her professor and classmates watched in awe as her device powered a small fan and a set of LED lights. Dr. Hargrove approached her after class, his usually stern expression softened with approval. "Excellent work, Miss Carter. You have a knack for this." "Thank you, Professor," Amelia said, her confidence soaring. For the first time, she felt like she truly belonged. As Amelia's confidence grew, so did her opportunities. She applied for and was accepted into a competitive research program focusing on renewable energy solutions. The program brought together students and faculty from around the world, all working toward innovative approaches to combat climate change. Amelia's project involved designing wind turbines that could function efficiently in urban environments, where space was limited and wind patterns were unpredictable. She worked tirelessly, collaborating with her team and presenting her findings at conferences. Her passion and dedication earned her the respect of her peers and mentors. One day, During a particularly intense brainstorming session, one of her teammates, a reserved engineering student named Marcus, spoke up. "Amelia, how do you stay so motivated? You're always the first one here and the last one to leave." She smiled, her mind flashing back to her father's words. "Because I know why I'm doing this. I want to create something that makes a difference. And I know it's possible." Her determination was infectious, and the team rallied behind her vision. Together, they developed a prototype that exceeded their expectations, earning recognition from industry leaders. By the time Amelia graduated, she had not only earned top honors but also secured a position at a renowned research institute. Her work focused on integrating renewable energy technologies into underserved communities, bringing power and opportunity to those who needed it most. Her accomplishments were celebrated far and wide, but Amelia remained humble. She often thought about her journey, the obstacles she had faced, the people who had doubted her, and the unwavering support of her father. Each step had shaped her into the person she had become. A year after starting her job, Amelia received an invitation to speak at her university's commencement ceremony. Standing on the stage, looking out at the sea of graduates, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. "When I first came to this university," she began, her voice steady, "I felt like I didn't belong. I doubted myself, compared myself to others, and wondered if I was good enough. But what I've learned is that belonging doesn't come from being the smartest person in the room. It comes from showing up, putting in the work, and believing in your purpose." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Every one of you has something unique to offer. The world will try to tell you otherwise, but don't listen. Trust in yourself, and don't be afraid to challenge what's possible." The audience erupted into applause, and as Amelia stepped off the stage, she felt the weight of her journey transform into a profound sense of accomplishment. Back in her hometown, Amelia's story continued to inspire. The local school introduced new STEM programs for girls, naming one of the scholarships after her. Young students often wrote to her, sharing their dreams and asking for advice. Amelia responded to each letter, encouraging them to pursue their passions. Her father, now retired, took great pride in watching his daughter's impact. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, he handed her a worn notebook filled with sketches and notes from their first wind turbine project. "I found this while cleaning out the garage," John said, his voice thick with emotion. "It reminded me of how far you've come." Amelia flipped through the pages, tears welling in her eyes. "I wouldn't be here without you, Dad." John smiled, his pride evident. "And I wouldn't have it any other way." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Amelia thought about the future. There was still so much to do, so many challenges to tackle. But she knew, without a doubt, that she was ready for whatever came next. The Carter family porch had always been a sacred space for Amelia and her father. As far back as she could remember, it was where they had shared their most meaningful conversations, under the stars, amidst the chirping crickets, and with a cup of tea or coffee in hand. Tonight was no different. Amelia stretched her legs out, resting her feet on the wooden railing. Her father, John, sat beside her, slowly swirling his mug. The air was thick with the scent of honeysuckle, and the golden hues of the setting sun painted the horizon. "I've been thinking," John began, his voice soft. "You've done so much in such a short time. Sometimes I wonder, what would have happened if you'd listened to Mr. Thompson back then?" Amelia turned her head, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Dad, I wouldn't even be here if I had listened to him. But I didn't because of you." John chuckled lightly, though his expression was tinged with seriousness. "It's funny, isn't it? When you're a parent, you spend so much time worrying about whether you're doing enough or saying the right things. Back then, I just wanted to make sure you didn't lose faith in yourself." Amelia smiled, resting her hand on his arm. "You didn't just help me keep faith, Dad. You built it with me, brick by brick." John gazed at her, his eyes soft with pride. "It wasn't hard to see your potential, Amelia. But I won't lie to you, there were moments I was scared." "Scared?" Amelia asked, surprised. John nodded. "Not of you failing. Never that. I was scared of the world failing you. Scared that people like Thompson would wear you down. That no matter how much I tried to lift you up, there would be days you'd feel like giving up." Amelia sat up straighter, her chest tightening at the thought. You never showed that, though. You always seemed so steady, so sure. That's the trick of being a parent, John said with a faint smile. Sometimes you have to hide your doubts because your kids need to see strength, not fear. Amelia leaned back, letting his words settle. She thought about all the times her father had been there for her, not just during the big moments, but in the small ones too. The late-night talks, the quiet encouragement, the way he always seemed to know what she needed before she even said it. You know, she said after a pause, when I was struggling in college, I used to replay your words in my head. Every time I thought I couldn't handle something, I'd think about that day you stood up to Mr. Thompson. And it reminded me that I could stand up to anything. John smiled, his eyes glistening. You've always been strong, Amelia. I just gave you the tools. You did the building. A week later, Amelia and John decided to take a trip to the nearby lake, a place they hadn't visited since Amelia was a child. The last time they'd been there, Amelia had been 9 years old, her curiosity insatiable as she asked question after question about the natural world around them. Now, as they walked along the shoreline, John couldn't help but marvel at how much she had grown. She was no longer the little girl chasing frogs and skipping stones. She was a woman, a scientist, someone making a difference in the world. But in her eyes, he could still see the spark of wonder that had always been there. Do you remember when we used to come here? John asked, picking up a smooth stone and tossing it into the water. It skipped twice before sinking. Of course, Amelia said, smiling. You used to tell me that the lake was a mirror for the sky. I thought that was the most poetic thing I'd ever heard. John laughed. Well, you always did see the beauty in things. Even in my corny metaphors. Amelia picked up a stone of her own, examining its shape before attempting a skip. It only bounced once, and she let out a mock groan. Guess I've lost my touch. Or the stones are just stubborn, John teased. They walked in companionable silence for a while, the sound of the water lapping against the shore filling the space between them. Finally, Amelia spoke. Dad, do you ever wish you'd done things differently? Like, followed a different path? John glanced at her, his brow furrowing slightly. What makes you ask that? I don't know, Amelia said, shrugging. You always seemed so sure of everything when I was growing up. But now that I'm older, I realize how much sacrifice goes into being a parent. You gave up a lot for me, didn't you? John stopped walking, turning to face her. Amelia, let me tell you something. There's not a single thing I regret about being your father. Yes, there were sacrifices. There always are when you love someone. But watching you grow into the person you are today? That's worth more than anything I could have done for myself. Amelia felt her throat tighten, and she blinked rapidly to keep the tears at bay. You're the best, you know that? John chuckled, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. I just wanted to be the dad you deserved. They continued their walk, their connection deeper than ever. The lake shimmered in the afternoon light, a perfect reflection of the sky above, a metaphor, perhaps, for the way John and Amelia mirrored each other in strength and resilience. A few months later, Amelia received an invitation to speak at an international conference on renewable energy. It was the biggest stage she had ever been offered, and while she was thrilled, she was also nervous. She called her father the night before, seeking his advice. Dad, she said, her voice wavering slightly, what if I mess up? What if I forget what to say or freeze in front of everyone? You won't, John said firmly. You've been preparing for this your whole life, even if you didn't realize it. Just remember why you're there, to share your knowledge, your passion. That's all you need to do. The next day, as Amelia stood on the stage in front of hundreds of people, she remembered her father's words. She spoke with confidence and clarity, weaving her personal journey into her presentation. When she finished, the audience rose to their feet, applauding loudly. Back home, John watched the live stream, a proud smile on his face. He couldn't have been prouder if he tried. Years later, as John grew older, Amelia found herself taking on the role of caregiver. Their bond only deepened as she supported him through the challenges of aging, just as he had supported her through every stage of her life. One evening, as they sat on the porch together, John reached for her hand. His grip was weaker now, but his love was as strong as ever. You've done so much, Amelia. he said, his voice soft but steady. More than I ever dreamed you would. But there's one thing I hope you'll always remember. What's that? Amelia asked, her eyes glistening. That no matter how far you go, no matter what you achieve, you'll always be my little girl, John said with a smile. Amelia leaned her head against his shoulder, her heart full. And you'll always be my hero. As the sun set, casting its golden glow over the horizon, they sat together in comfortable silence, the unbreakable bond between father and daughter a testament to the power of love, belief, and unwavering support. As John's health gradually declined, Amelia took more time away from her professional commitments to be with him. Though her career was thriving, she knew the importance of cherishing the moments they had left together. It was a role reversal that she embraced wholeheartedly, seeing it as her turn to give back for the years her father had been her rock. On a quiet Sunday morning, Amelia arrived at her father's house with groceries and a small potted plant. The house, though older now, still had the warmth of the home where she had grown up. The faint scent of her mother's cooking lingered in the air, even years after her passing. "Dad," Amelia called, setting the bags on the counter. "I brought you your favorite blueberry scones from the bakery downtown." John's voice came from the living room, where he was reclining in his favorite armchair. "You're spoiling me, kiddo. I'm going to start expecting this every week." Amelia laughed, walking in with the plant in her hands. "You already expect it. And this is for your windowsill. It's a peace lily. They're easy to care for." John chuckled, his smile lighting up his face. "I think you're underestimating my ability to neglect plants." Amelia set the pot on the table beside him and crouched down to his eye level. "I'll take care of it when I visit. And don't think I won't notice if it's wilting." John reached out, patting her hand. "You've always had a way of making sure I don't slack off." "That's because you taught me to never give up on anything," Amelia replied softly. John's expression grew thoughtful. "You know, I used to think I was just doing my duty as a father, providing, supporting, teaching. But watching you grow, seeing everything you've achieved, I realize now that you've given me more than I ever gave you." Amelia's brow furrowed. "Dad, that's not true. Everything I've done is because of you." John shook his head gently. "No, Amelia. You've always had the fire inside you. All I did was fan the flames." Later that day, they sat together on the porch, sipping tea. The sky was overcast, and the distant rumble of thunder hinted at an approaching storm. Amelia wrapped a blanket around her father's shoulders, her own cup cradled in her hands. "Do you ever think about Mom?" she asked quietly. John nodded, his gaze distant. "Every day. She would have been so proud of you, Amelia. She always said you were destined for great things." Amelia smiled wistfully. "I wish she could see how much of her strength lives on in you. And in me." John turned to her, his eyes glistening. "Your mother was the strongest person I've ever known. She taught me what it means to love unconditionally, to believe in something bigger than yourself. I see her in you all the time, in the way you carry yourself, in your determination." Amelia reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "And I see her in you, Dad. In the way you've always been there for me." The storm rolled closer, and rain began to fall, tapping softly against the porch roof. They stayed there, wrapped in the comfort of their shared memories, the rain washing away the weight of unspoken thoughts. As time passed, Amelia found herself reflecting more on the legacy her father would leave behind, not just for her, but for everyone he had touched. His quiet wisdom, his unshakable belief in her, and his ability to see the best in people had shaped her into the person she was. One evening, as they sorted through old photo albums, Amelia came across a picture of her father holding her as a baby. His younger self looked so full of hope and wonder, a stark contrast to the weariness in his eyes now. "What were you thinking about here?" she asked, holding up the photo. John leaned back, studying the image. "I was probably thinking about how terrified I was," he admitted with a chuckle. "Becoming a parent is the scariest thing in the world, Amelia. You're suddenly responsible for this tiny, fragile life, and you have no idea if you're going to get it right." "You got it more than right," Amelia said softly. John smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I don't know about that. But I do know that every time I doubted myself, I looked at you and realized it didn't matter. As long as I loved you, as long as I showed up, that was enough. Amelia hugged him tightly, her voice thick with emotion. You've always been enough, Dad. More than enough. As John's health continued to decline, Amelia began writing letters to him, small notes of gratitude and love that she would slip into his bedside drawer. She wanted him to know, even when she couldn't be there, how much he meant to her. One day, while organizing the drawer, John found the letters and called her over. Amelia, he said, his voice tinged with amusement. What's all this? Amelia blushed, sitting beside him. I just wanted you to know how much I appreciate you. You've always been my biggest supporter, and I wanted to put it into words. John's hands trembled slightly as he held one of the notes, his eyes scanning the words. These mean more to me than I can say, he said, his voice thick. But you don't have to write them down. I've always known how much you care. Sometimes it's easier to write than to say, Amelia admitted. And I want you to have something to hold on to. John reached out, pulling her into a hug. I don't need a piece of paper to remind me of your love, Amelia. But thank you. I'll treasure these. The day came when John's strength faded entirely, and Amelia stayed by his side in his final moments. They talked softly, reminiscing about the life they had shared, the laughter and tears, the triumphs and struggles. Amelia, John said, his voice barely above a whisper. Promise me something. Anything, she replied, her heart aching. Keep believing in yourself, he said. And when the world feels too heavy, remember that you've already moved mountains. You'll always have the strength to carry on. Tears streamed down Amelia's face as she held his hand. I promised it. With that, John closed his eyes, a peaceful smile on his lips. Amelia stayed by his side, her heart heavy with grief but filled with gratitude for the love they had shared. In the months that followed, Amelia channeled her pain into her work, honoring her father's legacy by continuing to break barriers and inspire others. She started a foundation in his name, dedicated to supporting young girls in STEM fields, ensuring that no one would ever feel limited by the doubts of others. The foundation quickly grew, offering scholarships, mentorship programs, and resources for students from underprivileged backgrounds. Amelia's work not only transformed individual lives but also began to reshape the narrative around what women could achieve in science. One evening, as she prepared for a gala celebrating the foundation's accomplishments, Amelia stood before a mirror, adjusting a pin on her lapel, a small symbol of the wind turbine she had built with her father all those years ago. You'd be proud, Dad, she whispered, a tear slipping down her cheek. I hope I'm making you proud. As she stepped onto the stage to deliver her speech, the applause was deafening. And though the spotlight shone brightly on her, Amelia felt her father's presence, steady and comforting, guiding her every step of the way. The bond they had shared, built on love, belief, and unwavering support, continued to light her path, a reminder that even in his absence, John Carter's legacy lived on in her heart and in the lives she touched.